Hello, my name is Keyack, and I'm a Tekla Structures trainer and consultant, and today I am going to give you an overview of the primary things in the Tekla Structures interface. I am currently in Tekla Structures version 2022, and so to get started, when you first create your model, you're going to see this views list appear, and a default 3D view is created. If I double click on that, or if I select it and press the arrow here, it will make that view visible. Now, in a separate video, I'm going to cover how to navigate through the views in the model. In this video, I'm going to focus just where are all the different tools and what do they mean throughout the Tekla Structures interface. Let's start at the upper left-hand corner. This oftentimes in training is what I call the Tekla menu or the file menu. And when we click in here, we're going to see things like creating a new model, opening another model, opening the model folder here. So here this actually opens up in File Explorer and shows you the complete model folder that you've created. And then here also things like exporting CNC files are here, other file formats like IFC, MIS for exporting KISS files, all of that is contained here. And then also here, another thing that is pretty common that you need to work with is project properties. So project properties is where you fill in the job number. And so for instance here, if my job number was this, anytime I enter in some information here and I see that this property field is yellow, it means that I have not modified or actually set this field on the model yet. So if I fill in the job name and the number, I just press modify, and then that particular value no longer turns yellow and it's actually been modified and set on the job. Some other things that are pretty common in here is if I scroll down to the bottom of this project properties, there's a user defined attributes option here at the bottom. This will actually open up a separate dialog box where I can fill in pretty common information that's going to appear on my drawing title blocks. And usually project standards is where you're going to fill things in, and then you're going to set different switches for how things will appear on your drawings. And then one other big thing is like fabricator information. If you want basically the fabricator's information, the address and contact information to appear on the title blocks. So that's a pretty big one here. Basically this project properties. Another common thing here is underneath the settings menu, you're basically going to go into options or advanced options. You can customize your toolbars, your keyboard shortcuts. You can turn different switches and things off here. So this is another common area that you'll come in and work with. That's the file menu. Now, if we just start to move across the top of Tekla, the other most important thing here is at the upper left-hand corner, there is a save button, which looks like a floppy disk. And the shortcut icon, whenever you hover over these, it'll show you the keyboard shortcuts. So Control plus S, which is pretty standard for save, will basically save the model. Then we have the undo and redo buttons here. And then we have the undo history. And then now we're going to go to what I call the menus within Tekla, or the tab pages on the ribbon at the top of Tekla. Basically, the steel tab page here, or the steel menu, controls modeling in columns and all of your parts. What's great in Tekla is whenever you hover over any of these different commands or icons, it will actually show you what this command does. It gives you a brief picture and information on how to use that command. And to click, if you click on that actual icon, it will get you into that particular command or mode. And you can see here that my cursor's changed. And if I always look at the lower left-hand corner of Tekla, this is basically like my command prompt. This is where Tekla is telling me the instructions of what it expects me to do to input or do things for a certain command. Now, the other most common thing that how Tekla works is whenever you're inside of a command, if you want to get out of it, you just right-click on your mouse and choose the interrupt option. Or if I click on here to activate the command again, if I want to get out of the command, I can also press the escape key on my keyboard. So that's how you essentially get out of a particular command or mode. You'll then see that this command is no longer active here at the top. So anything to do with modeling in steel parts, bolting things together, welding them together to create assemblies, all of that is done here on the steel tab. Now, concrete is basically where I'm going to model in all my concrete parts. I can put in columns, beams, and then there are submenus oftentimes to do additional types of things here. I can model in slabs, and then I can do wall panels. And so usually when you're a steel detailer, you're mainly modeling in the concrete here for reference for any steel that is connecting to your concrete and to show as a reference on your erection drawings. Now, let's go to the edit menu. The edit menu is 2 or 3 major things are on this menu. First of all, here towards the left, any type of cutting or coping operation that you're going to do on parts in the model is pretty much going to be here on this edit menu, and you can see that here on the left. Now, about midway through on this menu, there is a measure dropdown. This is really important here for actually putting in reference dimensions and measuring things as you input your steel or your grids. So here, if I just activate this command and I just pick from this location to this location, you'll see here at the lower left-hand corner that it is a distance of 20 foot. If I pick one more point here, it puts in that distance here in the model. I can then right-click and interrupt to escape out of that command. And if I just click here with my mouse on the background of the view and then right-click and say, basically redraw, then that measurement will go away. So these are just some basic things that you'll do as you get started with Tekla. Now also all of the copy commands, copy specials such as mirror and rotate, these are all underneath this particular menu, including the move commands and the move special commands. Then one other thing that's really common here is working with construction points. So in separate videos, I'll cover how these different commands work. But essentially here, what you'll see is that these are really great for laying in intersections or dividing up a bay by a certain number of points in equal spaces. And they're great for allowing you to select certain areas in the model to put in your steel framing. Construction objects are also great, such as arcs and circles for doing radius steel, or construction lines help you actually visualize some reference lines for you to model in your steel. Now, let's go ahead and go to the view menu. The view menu, you will go to this quite a bit. And at the beginning, when we created our model, we opened up our view list, and here we could see all of the views that we've created. Now, there are none created here except for this 3D view, which is currently visible, and we can close that down. So if you ever want to get back to your plan views or elevation views, that is located here. Now, to create new views, you go under this new view dropdown. This is basically going to allow me to create a plan view. So if I do basic view here, I can enter in the elevation. So let's say I did 120 foot here and I say create. It now creates a new view that is at that 120 foot elevation. So that's how you can create additional plan views. Now, if I want to then go back to my views list, here I was just basically making a temporary view, so this didn't actually get created. If I go up here to view properties and I load up plan view, and then I type in plan at elevation 120 foot and press apply to store these settings. When I press apply, the next new view that's going to be created is going to use that name. So if I say new view, basic view, and then I type in 120 foot here and say create, now I have a new view that is created at 120 foot. And then you'll see that it actually appears here in my named view list. So there's more on that in a separate video, but the ability to create new views here, including view with 2 points for doing section views, that is pretty important here inside of this particular view menu. Now you'll also change your work plane. Here I'm just going to quickly show using view a work plane using 2 points. So my work plane is actually set down here at the origin right now because my grid is up here at 100 foot. But if I just pick 2 points, then I can change my user coordinate system or my work plane in the model. So if I had skewed or sloped geometry and I wanted to work in that skew and easily enter in dimensions in that adjusted work plane, I could easily do so. Now the easiest way to get the work plane back to global is come in here and go to work plane, and then you can come in and say parallel to XYZ plane and press the change button. That's one way. Or if I come down here to the lower left hand corner, there's this option to press this model origin in the drop down at the lower left hand corner, and that will return my work plane back to global. So I would say that the ability to create new views and then maybe even changing your work area, which is basically this visible box around the grid, and changing your work plane are the most common things that you're going to do here inside of the view menu. Now, if I go to drawings and reports, the 3 major things that are here is my document manager, so that way I can view all of my drawings that are inside of this model. And there are different types of drawings here on the left-hand side. There's nothing shown because I haven't created any drawings. But here I can manage my drawings. Here I can set my drawing properties for different drawing types. I can create shop drawings, which are called fabrication drawings. GA drawings, which are called general arrangement drawings in Tekla, which means your erection drawings. And then here, the other most important step that's inside of this drawings and reports menu is the ability to perform numbering. And numbering is the process where Tekla will compare all of the parts and assemblies in the model, and it'll assign piece marks automatically in quantities. Then there's the ability to run reports. So there's a whole series of like bolt reports, material reports that you can essentially run when you're releasing your model and your drawings out for fabrication. So I would say that these are probably, from a basic training point of view, these are the most important menus that you'll go to. The only thing on the Manage tab that you need from a basic training point of view is really coming in here to the Phase Manager. This is where you can actually set up additional sequences on the job. So phases in Tekla essentially means sequences, especially when you're working with a fabricator and erector and you're releasing different packages of information for different sequences. So this is where you can essentially add those. So that covers essentially the top menus or tabs at the top of Tekla Structures. Next, when we actually go over here to the upper right-hand corner of Tekla, this is where I can actually control different views. Here's another way for me to actually get to the view list. I'm going to open up this plan at elevation 120 foot. So now I have two views visible. And if I actually select on them here, it'll bounce between those two views. Now, if I double click at the top of this view, it will maximize that specific view. If I come up here to the window menu at the upper right-hand corner, I can then choose the different open views that I have, and it will toggle me between those. I can also come in here and do window tile vertically, and this will then allow me to see a 3D view on the right, and then I have my 2D view here at 120 foot on the left. So oftentimes when I'm first starting to model and new Tekla Structures users, I often tell them model things in 2D, but have a 3D view open over here on the right, so that way you can see exactly what it is that you're modeling and making sure that the things you're doing in a 2D view are appearing correctly in 3D. Now, let's move over to the right-hand side of Tekla Structures. You're going to see a series of buttons here. I'm not going to explain all of them, but a couple of key ones here are the instructor. This is actually came out a couple years ago in newer versions of Tekla, and this is fantastic as you go to different commands. So if I go back to steel here and I go to the beam command, this intelligently will show little animated GIFs or short videos, gives you deeper instructions than just the tooltips alone when you hover over that particular command. This is a fantastic piece of functionality. Once you watch even this video here where I'm giving you an overview of where things are at, you can use the tooltips and the instructor to basically help you learn how to use each of these different commands. Now, I'm then going to go to the Properties button here on the right-hand side of Tekla. This is here, for instance, when I'm inside of this beam command. So I double-clicked on this beam command, and that will actually open up the Properties window. And this is where I can put in like the beam name, the profile, and then I can select a profile here. And essentially, I'm setting all of the properties for any new beams or columns and parts that I want to put in the model, as well as I can modify parts that are already in the model as well through this Properties window. Now, what I can also do is go down to Applications and Components. This is also a common basically area of Tekla that you're going to commonly be working with. If I go underneath the steel detailing category, we're going to see these different groups, and this is where all of Tekla's connections and components are. So clip angles, shear tabs, and you can basically go to these groups, or what you can do is if you're looking for a particular connection, you can say I'm looking for shear, and then even tab, and then here basically it'll narrow down to different results that you're looking for. Now you can also basically add these different connections. Once you find one that you want to use, you can add them to your favorites or create additional rule groups that will basically isolate the common connections that you use. So the Applications and Components panel is extremely important for where you're going to apply connections between your steel and the model. All right, now let's go ahead and move down to the bottom of Tekla Structures. The next spot to cover is essentially your snap icons, and they are here at the lower right-hand corner of Tekla. And when I actually put in some steel, so watch this, I'm going to put in a beam real quick, and when I hover near these grid lines, notice that these different snaps kick in. And you'll see that the icon for the snapping type in the model will actually match the shape of the snapping controls that you see here. If you press on a particular button, then that snap becomes active when you're here in the model and you're in a command that is requiring you to pick a point. Now, I tend to turn off this nearest snap. It's on by default, but I turn it off because I want to make sure that I'm truly getting to the intersection of particular endpoints or grid intersections, and so I will often turn that off. Now, I'm going to put in a beam here in the model. Now, notice that down here at the the end of the snapping toolbars, there's these two commands, snap to reference lines and snap to geometry lines. The snap to geometry lines and points is kind of dangerous when you're trying to just put in your steel framing like beams and columns, because notice it is allowing me to snap to the corners and intersections here, and I don't necessarily want that. So I'm going to click on that so it's no longer active. And so now when I'm modeling in my steel, it is only going to go to the main reference points or the center line of the steel as I input those beams. This allows me to be zoomed out a little bit more and just prevents any kind of errors. Now, one other neat little snap that's here is there's this snap to lines. And so this allows me to just decrease the amount of inputs that I'm doing to put in my beams. So you can see here that wherever the head of the arrow is, that's going to be the end point of me instead of me picking here and here to put in a beam, I pick this here. And now if I right click and interrupt and click on this beam, we'll see that the yellow start point is down here and the end point or the second point picked is here where the head of the arrow was. So that's a neat little snapping tool. Now, at any time, if you need to do a snap override, you're in the middle of a command and you want to override and use a specific snap just for this command. Let's say I want to specifically only go to midpoint here. If I right click and choose mid, this is my snap override. When I do that, now notice that the endpoint snaps do not work for this particular snap. So I'm going to click here, but now after I've done that particular snap, it goes back to the normal snaps. A lot of people get messed up and they think that they need to come down here and turn snaps on and off. But if you're just looking for a specific snap, you can right click and do a snap override for that command. Here I'm going to interrupt. Next we have selection filters. So snapping is all done here and we're going to move to the middle of the interface. And basically this is where I can set a variety of different selection filters. Let's say that I change my selection filters to select columns. Now when I window around in the model, notice that it will not highlight any of the beams, but I don't have any columns in the model, so nothing gets selected. Now if I change this here to steel and then basically beam, and now if I window around, it's going to allow me to highlight beams. So this is a great way to quickly filter for certain types of parts and objects. If I go back to standard here, that'll allow me to select anything. Now, in other videos, I'm going to cover the ability to select assemblies. So if I actually change this to select assembly, you'll see here that it actually puts a blue line around the assemblies in the model, or I can select parts. And then I can also, if there were connections in the model, I could select connections. So these are just some different controls that we'll actually cover here that allow me to select different hierarchies or levels of objects. Now, this last set of selection tools here basically allows me to control what type of objects I'm choosing. So here, if I just want to only select grids, I can deselect everything by clicking the select all button at the left. And you'll see here that it allows me to just select parts. I can deselect that and just select grids. And so now notice I can't select parts, but I can click on and double click on my grid. Now, if I go back to select all here, it turns all my selections on. So this allows you to filter and select by certain types of objects. These selection filters here are more for basically selecting maybe parts with specific properties, whereas these selection filters here on these icons are certain types of objects. Now, the other thing we can do is we can actually do a search in the model. So here I'm going to just change this one beam size here to W12 by 14. And press enter here to modify that beam size. So everything else is 12 by 26 except for this one specific beam. Now if I do a search in the model for W12 by 14 and then press the enter key, it's then going to find all those parts in the model and then highlight them for me. So this is almost like a quick selection filter or a quick search that you can do in the model. And then we can clear that out if we no longer need that. The last thing is that you have the ability to actually save your work planes and then reload different work planes in the model. And again, that is something that I can cover in different videos. All right, so that gives you an overview of the Tekla Structures interface. One last thing that's pretty important here is that the lower right-hand corner, there's some different information. And the most important thing that I would say is that there is this ability to see the number of objects that you have selected. So if I actually click on a piece, you'll see that it's highlighted, and at the lower right-hand corner, it shows that there is one object selected. If I hold down Control, that allows me to add to my selection set, and now I have 4 objects selected. This comes in really handy to verify if selection filters have found anything that you can't easily see, especially if it's small and you're zoomed out on the model. So selection filters and basically this quantity of objects that are selected, it can be pretty important. Now, another thing here is that I have talked about this in other videos, and I am bringing this up quite a bit during training, is at the lower left-hand corner. This is the final thing we'll talk about, which is the command prompt. Whenever I'm inside of a command, here at the lower left-hand corner, Tekla is showing me what it expects me to do. So here it says pick the start point of my beam, then it says pick the end point of the beam. This is really important. Whenever you're in doubt about what Tekla is expecting you to do when you're in the middle of a command, look at the lower left-hand corner and it will basically tell you what it expects you to do. So now I'm going to right-click and interrupt, and that command prompt then clears out. So that gives you a good overview of the entire Tekla Structures interface. If you found this content useful, please subscribe to our channel and press the alerts button to be notified when we upload new content.